Jeff, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Mike, so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
100%, man. 100%. Shout out to Zach for making an introduction, our mutual connection. Dude, I'm looking forward to this. So, for people that don't know you and your story, give us the spark notes. Who you are, where you coming from, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so we dive into all sorts of different things. What I'll tell you about me, and I think we're going to talk a lot about this today, is I'm obsessed with fostering deep connections at the individual, team, and organizational level. Oftentimes we have intentions to do right by the people that we work with. For a lot of your audience, entrepreneurial minded, or they're building teams or thinking about doing side hustles or whatever. No matter what, you're working with people, whether you're in the 9 to 5 or whether you are serving clients or whether you're building a team in an organization, right? We're working with people, and how we connect with those people is what really matters for driving the kinds of results that we're trying to do. Not to mention that it's just like the right thing to do. How did I get here? Like you, Mike, I have a technical background. I did actually mechanical engineering, then went into software, did manufacturing. I was working with civil and electrical engineers. I was creating products. I got an engineering leadership, and then a big turning point for me was the organization I was working with a number of years ago merged with another company. We went through a rebranding, and we went through what I would call kind of an identity crisis as an organization, right? And so we brought in some consultants, and a lot of what they were working to help us work through was mindset stuff. Not just like growth mindset or confidence or like success mindset stuff, but like mindset around how do we see and interact with people. Like, are we treating people as people, or are we treating people as objects, right? That don't matter like we matter. And that changed me and how I started to see things. That got me on a path, because I got to actually end up delivering some of that training to the rest of the organization after we had it as a leadership team. And it changed me as I was able to see how changing how people saw their work and their lives in the context of what we were trying to accomplish could change the results that we were getting as we were trying to work together. And I started looking forward to those days of doing that sort of work more and more, aside from the technical management work that I was doing at the time. And eventually in 2019 decided that it was time for me to do more and more of that. So I took the leap. We can jump into that, but started my business and haven't looked back since.
Dude, I love it. How big was the company that you were at as you got introduced to that type of mindset work?
Yeah, so we were kind of a mid-sized company, probably about 250 people. I had worked at a
Okay.
really large, like Fortune 5 organization previous to that, then came into that and really enjoyed kind of the smaller, I wore a lot of hats in that organization, really enjoyed that as a shift, but as kind of my journey continued more towards the entrepreneurial path.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. It's in my time in corporate, I spent a little over 5 years at my last company. And it wasn't like we were just the engineering counterpart. So technically it was a separate organization, but we were behind a massive global company. So like we had the prestige of a massive organization, but the engineering org was really only like 40, 50 people.
Yeah.
So like it was a similar vibe. Like you get to wear a lot of
Mhm.
hats, you get to work fairly intimately with a lot of people.
Right.
And but we went through similar acquisitions and
Yeah.
a lot of culture shifting and
Mhm.
the uh the layoffs and a lot of those types of things, restructuring, which I know a
Mhm.
lot of people are experiencing right now in the current
Sure.
market. This is getting recorded and going live. Um, Talk to me about some of that mindset work. Like how receptive were you to it right from the jump? And how did it land in the organization?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I had some personal realizations at the point when I was going through. It was like 2 full days. There was just like 20 of us in the leadership group were kind of huddled up in a hotel conference room for a couple of days with the consultant who was coming in and doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there were some realizations that I had at the time. It was interesting because there was like this tension where a lot of things we were talking about gelled and vibed with values that I wanted to have personally, right? But I also saw as we went through some of that work how incongruent I was actually living with some of that, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So, like, I was like, yes, like this is how I and everyone should be being and acting and working with each other. And then as we went through some of the exercises, some of the awareness peeled away some of the layers of
Yeah.
my lack of self awareness, or sometimes we might call it self deception,
Hmm.
right? That I started to realize. I wouldn't say that I got full realization, but I began to open myself up to some of the realities that I was not living in congruence with that in a lot of ways. And I saw that happen with a lot of people. One of the cool things about that was, some of the vulnerability and the questions that were asked amongst us as leaders trying to figure this out together. Um,
Mm.
and then certainly then that experience of me having the opportunity to share more of that and implement that and how we operated and that becoming a core value of how we were expected to operate as an organization, and teaching that to the rest of the organization, um, and seeing different people's reactions, receptions to it, always wondering, okay, I'm going to try this, but I want to see that, especially like you're always looking at leaders and stuff like that. Are they going to do this right? Do they care? Are they just talking the talk? Are they going to walk the walk? And this combination of everyone needing to take responsibility for that culture that you're trying to build,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, leaders have probably the highest level of responsibility and impact on what that means, but um, everyone can do something about that. And seeing ourselves in what I can do, what responsibility I can take, um, to make a change.
Yeah. One thing that you said that really stuck out to me at the beginning was you said values that I wanted to have,
Right.
which I think is really interesting. I think usually when we're talking about values, it's like, what are your values? We don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like forecast
Mm-hmm.
and think about who we want to become or like what that version of ourselves, what they value, etc. Um, how confrontational was that? If you could step back into that version of Jeff, like how
Mm.
confrontational was that as you were peeling back the layers and you were realizing that the self-awareness wasn't exactly where it was, or where you thought it was, and there was a lot more growth than you had anticipated that you were on the horizon of.
Yeah, so let me give you a more specific example, kind of illustrate some of this in a story, right? So, um, as I was leading my team, and this was actually like a couple years into me, uh, yeah, actually probably about a year after I started teaching some of this stuff inside the organization. So I was teaching this stuff all the time. I was certainly preaching it to my team, that I was leading at the time. And then at that time, I started a part-time MBA program. And in the very first semester, took a leadership class. And in that leadership class, we administered a one of those 360 surveys,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we get feedback from my peers, the people I was leading, some of the people that led me, and giving me anonymous feedback on how I was doing and being and interacting with people and some of the strengths and weaknesses that others saw in me. Okay. And it was about 12 or 13 people that I got responses from. Um, and one of the key themes that came out of that was that Jeff doesn't listen, or doesn't listen well. And if I bring up an idea or something and it conflicts with what Jeff wants, then Jeff is probably going to brush it off and not actually consider it, and um, not value that. So,
Yeah.
and there was not just one person who said that; it was multiple. Okay. and so this is one example of an opportunity of awareness that, like, I had a value I wanted, and I was talking to people all the time about how we need to see people as people and consider what they care about and what they're trying to accomplish and how we can work better together. I was teaching courses on this to the rest of
Yeah.
the company, and yet here I was, the people that I work directly with, saying that I'm not doing that, right? That was an awakening for me, on just one level. And so, um, but but I see any of those opportunities for that direct feedback as so critical and decision points for us, right?
Yeah.
We get to decide, what am I going to do with this? Feedback is so critical because you can either get all defensive about it, or you can be like, okay, like, is there some validity to this, and do I need to do something about this? And so I tried to take it seriously, and had some pretty vulnerable and conversations where I was really trying to ask and seek to understand even more from my team, especially, what was I doing? What did they need from me
Hmm.
in that situation? And what was important for me was then to signal and be explicit about, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, but also ask them and to recognize that I was certainly not going to be perfect immediately on this, right? And so to ask them to help me to hold myself accountable, and also continue to signal that I cared about making a shift. In this case,
Yeah.
really listening intently. So I put like a sticky note that had the word listen on my laptop everywhere I went. In our team area, we put the word listen in the corner of the whiteboard, in bold letters. And I asked them, if I wasn't doing that, if I wasn't listening, then I asked them to call me out, right? And tell me and signal, hey, Jeff, you're not doing this right now. And the beautiful thing is that they did. And so it's that constant, I was willing to say, I'm wrong. I need your help. This is my intent, but I'm not going to be perfect at that. Please help me as we continue to do this better. So that, and when they did bring that up, it was my responsibility to then reinforce that that was safe to do so, rather than getting defensive. Because if I were to get defensive and be like, no, I'm listening, then that's just going to shut them down, and they're never going to do that again.
Hmm.
Right. Um, and so that criticality of us being willing to be vulnerable, and so that was just one example of a big decision point for
Yeah.
me on that journey.
Dude, that's so cool. And it's so important. Like, the feedback piece is absolutely critical, right? We need people to hold up a mirror for us at times.
Right.
Um, I've done a lot of like very deep, immersive personal development events, like programs, trainings, etc. And I'm thinking, as you were sharing that story, I was thinking back to some of them. And one of the exercises that impacted me the most was around feedback.
Mhm.
And it was, I won't go into too much detail, but basically it was like complete strangers. And it was wild to me how accurate someone's feedback can be, just on like them experiencing your essence for no interaction, and getting feedback about their experience of us having just met one another, and how accurate and how consistent it is.
Mm.
It blew me away. And I guess I bring this up because I've definitely been that person over the years, early on in my journey, and probably still to this day at some point. Like, there's always another level, right? I've definitely been that person that has discounted the feedback, and I told a story as to why the feedback was invalid. They don't know me. They don't understand why I'm operating this way. They don't insert whatever. And I remember going through that experience and being like, holy shit, none of these people know me. None of them have ever met me. And not only is there all of their feedback spot on, but it's incredibly consistent with one another. And they
Yeah.
all come from different states, right? It's so, so critical. How did the rest of the team evolve, and like what was most effective with really creating that environment? Because to your point, like it requires vulnerability, it requires openness, but that requires a special environment to foster that for one another. Like what was most effective, and how did the rest of the team resonate with it?
Yeah, so I think certainly trying, me attempting to take the lead there. They really tried to support each other on that. So what we're trying to do is, like, sometimes there's tough love, right, that you need to give. It's not like you're just being all soft and we love you all the time and this is wonderful, right? Like we have a mission, we have work to do, we have things we need to accomplish. And
Yeah.
so, it's not like we're just being all soft, but still doing that from a place together where they could, hold me accountable, but I was certainly holding them accountable, and they were trying to hold each other accountable. And
Yeah.
so all of us had this positive pressure because we cared about each other and the success of the team as a whole more than our individual accolades, right? Then people saw that, and we were able to, grow and progress. And we moved through, like, one of the things that my team was doing is we were going through that rebrand. I was very involved in the rebranding process from the engineering side. And so anything that touched software or hardware or manufacturing, my team touched to make sure that switch happened to the new brand with the new standards and everything, right?
Yeah.
So there were hundreds and hundreds of individual parts and documents and websites and pieces of software that got touched over the course of a few years. And establishing the processes, and there were some hiccups along the way, and some times where we did some things where there were uh, very expensive problems that happen, and we had to learn from those experiences and support each other through that, rather than pointing fingers and blaming all the time. And so it was really critical as we were moving through that, with support with some of the other people that we were interacting with and collaborating with along the way, um, to help us move through some of those changes as well.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. As you got closer to taking that leap in 2019,
Mm-hmm.
what prompted it? Like, what was the moment where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I know what that was for me, but I'm curious what
Yeah.
it was for you. Like, were you always someone that was like, F this, I'm like, this is a means to an end, I'm going to build something for myself? Or was there a pivotal moment where you were just like, holy crap, like I need to go do something on my own, I'm unemployable? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what was that thing for you?
Yeah, so there were a number of things along the way that sparked that for me. Like, starting in 2016, I was starting doing some side hustles. Like, for a few years, I was creating some brands and sourcing stuff from domestically and internationally, selling stuff on Amazon. And so I was, doing stuff like that on top of my engineering work. And so that was kind of the beginning that sparked kind of this, hey, there's other stuff, side hustles, entrepreneurial bug for me. But then this combination of doing some of this training and culture building work, and then my really vast, wide array of engineering work that I'd done, and I was like, what do I really want to do? Not just that's a hustle that's going to make me some money, but what do I want to do that feels like I've got some unique ability here, and that would really kind of fill up my cup a little bit, in a way that would get me excited to
Mhm.
to do this. And then in the organization, as it often happens, there were some organizational restructuring things, and some of those things lined up in ways that I wasn't really aligned with where I thought that I was going to do great work anymore. And so I had some tough conversations, and this was a hard time for me to do this. But uh, I essentially had the conversation that said, hey, where this is headed isn't going to be great for me, which means it's also not going to be great for the organization, because I'm going to be put in a spot where I can't really do my best work. Because I had sort of kind of moved from being a creator of
Mhm.
products and processes to kind of a maintainer. And that's a space of boredom and mental death for me
Yeah.
when I'm in that space. When I'm just sort of just doing my thing over and over and over again, like I can't operate well there. And so I said, so either we need to explore a different option here, or I probably need to go, and that's probably the right answer. And so I had a really vulnerable conversation there. And we explored some different things, but eventually found out that there wasn't going to be another great fit. And so, but because of the way that I approached that, they were really cool and gave me some time to transition and everything. So I sometimes say I kind of got myself fired in a way. But that was a spark that said, okay, now what? And I didn't know what was next at the time. And so I spent a lot of time in reflection, journaling. I'm a spiritual person, so I was in prayer a lot. Um, and eventually there was this day where I was journaling and thinking of different ideas of maybe a career shift if I wanted to go get another job, or business ideas or other things. And I started thinking about this combination of relation of all the different types of engineering disciplines that I've worked in and some of the principles that come from that, right? And how that relates to some of the personal development and team development work that I really loved. And it was just like I couldn't, in that moment, I couldn't stop writing. Like the ideas just were just flowing, 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 and flowing. And so I sort of took that, and I had this just excitement that I was lit up that said, kind of internally just felt like this is it,
Yeah.
right? To some degree. And so I took that leap, and that was tough. Where I was halfway through the MBA program at that point. I had a stay-at-home wife with 2 young kids, and then we eventually had another one on the way, and now we have 4, by the way. And so
Wow.
I was the only source of income, and I didn't have any money that was happening yet from a side hustle or anything. And then, sure enough, a few months later, the pandemic hits, and that's a whole fun thing to go through. But um, and so I wouldn't generally recommend that for most people.
Yeah.
And there were days that I was absolutely scared out of my mind. Like I literally um, just wanted to crawl under my bed and hide from the world because I was so scared. Like, how am I going to do this? I almost felt called
Yeah.
to do this, right? That this was a shift, and I felt like this was the direction I needed to go, but I didn't know how to make that happen. And for an engineer who wants to have an objective answer and have some certainty in my life and what that future is going to look like, and I didn't have any of that, that was extremely difficult to work through. And young kids, and
Yeah.
we had a house, and what are we going to do, and what does that future hold? um, and there are days that I still feel like that, by the way. but
I don't think that
but
goes away.
yeah, it doesn't really, but it does lessen comparatively, I think, as we
Totally.
learn to embrace it a little bit. um, and only till later do I realize the value in some of that. I'd love a quote by psychologist I love. Her name is Virginia Satir. She says, many people prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty.
Powerful, but true.
Right.
Unfortunately true.
Right. So often we keep ourselves in what we know, even though we know it's not good for us.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're more afraid of the uncertainty on the other side.
There's
Right.
have you ever read the book Unfuck Yourself by Gary Bishop? I think it's Gary Bishop.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it yet.
So I was living in Jersey City at the time. Gary Bishop. I'm just looking up that I'm telling the right name before. Yeah, get out of your head and into your life. Gary Bishop. Yep. Um, I distinctly remember listening to this book, and I was walking to my old favorite coffee shop that I used to work at when I lived in Jersey City in the Heights, right above Hoboken.
Mm.
And the the passage from that book that resonated the most with me, and I think this will land for you based on what you just shared. I'm paraphrasing, but it basically says, all we crave in life as humans is certainty. Yet everything that we truly want out of life lies in uncertainty, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That relationship, you don't know how it's going to turn out. You know, if your heart's
Right.
going to get broken. right? That business, you don't know if it's going to flop like 99% of startups, right? That career, you don't know. We want to talk about how it's guaranteed. You don't know if you're going to be part of the next round of layoffs. Look at what's happening in the market,
Totally.
right? So like it's very eye-opening, but everything that we crave lies in uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty twisted game when you think about it. Like, especially for engineers like us, dude. Like we need pragmatism. So
Right.
I can relate.
Yeah.
As you were taking that leap, dude, you had some pretty serious necessity. And
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that is like there was a magnifying glass on making it work. I remember I always joke that when I took my business full time, I ripped the business model apart and was essentially starting from scratch when I left, which I
Mm-hmm.
also don't recommend, nor did I really plan for it, right? But I
Yeah.
was also like 27, no, 28. I was single. I had no responsibilities other than my bills that like I brought on. And most of that was just investing in my personal development, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of rent, like wasn't that expensive in the Heights, you know. I didn't have a family, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have kids. Talk to me about how you navigated that because on one side, like it creates tons of urgency. It makes your why that
Mm-hmm.
much stronger. But
Right.
I think as any of us who have been in those situations, like too much urgency creates scarcity. Like you have to walk a tightrope. How did you navigate that early on?
Yeah, so quite frankly, there's definitely some mental ping pong going on both sides of that, right? So where it was fuel some days, and other days it was a big weight on me, right? And so just I mean, one of the ways is just finding people and resources that I could connect to, that so I didn't feel alone in the process, right?
Yeah.
Because the business, I was working from home out of a bedroom, and pretty much all over Zoom, and I still do mostly stuff remote, but still finding ways that I could connect with people either locally or in other communities, and coaches and stuff, and doing some of that personal investment was so critical. So I invested, for the first time, $5,000 in my first coach. Like I'd never done anything like that before, and at a time where I didn't know what that even looked like or how it, but that was just kind of the signal, like, hey, I'm really dedicated to this, right? And I recognize that I do not have all the answers, but there's some help I need along the way. And I haven't stopped that continual investment in different sorts of programs to help me with all the things that I need help with. So this idea of connecting with others, and it's not just like the coach, the guru who has all the answers, but the people in those communities that I wanted to surround myself with, right? They were so critical, right? And some of that has led me to some of the things I'm working on today, which is we are talking about earlier, like how do we promote more connection, right? And the pandemic, I think, magnified some of that for us, but some of the data, right, for how actually the lack of connection that most humans feel like is it's crazy, because we're at the most digitally technologically connected time ever in the history of the world, and yet actually the levels of loneliness, isolation, and social disconnection are at the highest they've ever been
Yep.
as well, right? In fact, I don't know if you saw, Mike, but a few weeks ago the US Surgeon General put out a big advisory saying that that isolation, loneliness, social disconnection are such a big deal that they're like at an epidemic level.
Hmm.
Okay. So just to give you some statistics around this, we want to play by the numbers, right? So over half, 50 to 60% of people report feeling lonely most of the time. And this is just stuff, data in the US. On a mortality rate basis, people feel lonely or disconnected has the same effect on a mortality rate, like how soon we're going to die, as someone who smokes 15 cigarettes a day, right? On an economic basis, healthcare costs related to isolation and loneliness cost almost $7 billion in excess Medicare payments. And as far as companies and the impact there, right? In the US alone, stress-related absenteeism attributed to loneliness costs employers $154 billion every year, right? So people not showing up to work because of the health effects of loneliness. And I don't want to show up because of mental health stuff. I feel lonely, I feel disconnected, I don't want to come to work,
Hmm.
right? Or the health impacts because it impacts virtually every health thing you can imagine, from mental health, heart disease, lung disease, susceptibility to viruses and everything else, right? um all that plays into our, are we living good lives?
Yeah.
Are we healthy? And then, let alone, if I'm not feeling healthy, if I'm not feeling connected to people, can I even do great work, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're in the 9 to 5 or some combination,
Yeah.
right? If we are not connected to people in our personal lives and certainly in our professional lives and in our communities, we can't be our best selves,
Yeah.
right? um, and so uh, along the entrepreneurial journey for me, it has been also a journey of learning how to actually connect with people in a deeper way, including my wife, right? Because I was a very experienced uh, emotional suppressor. um, I held my true self back and what I was feeling from others because I wanted to project what I wanted them or what I thought they wanted from me, right?
Mm.
Instead of the realities. Um, call it impression management. I wanted to manage the impressions that others had of me,
Yeah.
right? And um, and really that held me back from actually some of the connection, the deeper connection, and connecting as human beings that we crave, just like we need food and water and shelter,
The
in some of
that
those
last
ways.
part's really interesting to me. The suppression piece.
Mm.
You think that you used to do that? Was that because of, like, I just had this question formulated in my mind and I just completely lost it. I still have the concept, but the words are gone. Was that like a people pleasing tendency, like wanting to evoke the reaction that would make them feel good? Was it like a nervousness about evoking a reaction that maybe was less desired? What do you think led to you suppressing your true self in those situations?
Yeah, I think there's probably multiple layers there, but if we go to some of the deeper layers, I feared that if people really knew me, then they wouldn't like me,
Mm,
right? They wouldn't respect me. Um, and so I didn't want to be known
was it
by
true?
people. No. And that's usually the case.
Yeah.
Um, that those fears that we have that drive commitments. Uh, See, I didn't know, right? But I can look back now that I had a commitment to this impression management because of my fear of being known. So if you can like almost put any of these fears of what we imagine happening, if insert, something that you might do, then insert the fear that you have,
Hmm.
right? So I say, if people really knew me, then they wouldn't like and respect me or want to be with me. Um, but in order to move through that, we have to test that, right? And so you can almost put on the engineer's hat, like, okay, let's design a test, let's run an experiment, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was doing this, but I actually there's psychology work that I've gotten into that backs this up, and I now teach this to some of my clients. But we can run a test that says, okay, what's a safe, simple way that I can take that assumption, that belief, and actually test it. And so I had to test opportunities of being even more vulnerable in a different way, other than just saying, hey, I'm not listening, I want to listen. That's one level of vulnerability. But like sharing with some people some of the things that I was quite shameful about in my life, and and struggled with. And by the way, shame's like the worst emotion on the planet.
Yeah.
Um, it never does any good for us. But um, and then seeing how people responded, and in almost every case, people responded with only love and acceptance, and because suddenly they saw me and they had human love and compassion for me in a
Yeah.
different way than I wasn't allowing people to see before, right? So some of that family, some of that's, other people in support groups in my life, but
Yeah.
um, critical some of the work that I've needed to do over the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, dude, I love it. It's so important, right? I was having a conversation. I can't remember who this was with. Maybe it was a client earlier today or yesterday, or a friend or a colleague, someone. We were talking about like the words that we use, right? And how we communicate. And I think oftentimes, at least when we get to the point where we're like, shit, I need to communicate this, but then we're so fearful to communicate it, even though we've gotten to the point that we know we need to, we're so fearful of doing it because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or we're afraid of not having the perfect verbiage or whatever it is. This is especially relevant in sales. We're so nervous about this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reality is, and I'd love your perspective on this, Jeff, but what I've found and what I've seen over the years is that it has so little to do with the words,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like sales is emotion, right? It's a transfer of emotion. It's so much more what's behind the words
Mm-hmm.
than the perfect verbiage. And I think that's the same in all communication. Um, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you agree, if you disagree, but
Yeah, I think some of the words that come to mind for me on how to describe that and tease that out is, in any relationship or interaction, are we being purely transactional, right? And what needs to be said, what needs to be accomplished. If you're trying to sell something, a service or a product or whatever, like, do I only see this person as a potential transaction? Do I only see them as dollar signs,
yeah.
right? Or are we treating our relationships and the people we're interacting with, the people we're trying to serve in our businesses or whatever, in a more transformational way, like truly believing that we have an opportunity to serve them with whatever service or product we're giving, in a way that can be helpful,
Mm,
right? And if they decide to work with us, great. If not, that's okay too, right? But either way, we want to provide value in some form of transformation for them. Um, and that's critical in a business entrepreneurial standpoint. That's critical certainly in our personal relationships, our loved ones and family and friends that we care about deeply, and that care about us deeply, right?
mm,
Are we and certainly our working relationships too, like how often are we just transactional with employees or partners or others, like, hey, I'll do this, you do this, cool, check, 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 like here's the task we need to do.
yeah.
um, and we're not really curious or care about the human behind what's going on there, right? So how do we actually get curious and get to a deeper level of connection, get beyond the freaking small talk? The weather just really isn't that interesting, I promise. But
It's one of the most
but
critical
actually,
things. I always critique people on my team. I'm like, dude, stop asking about the weather.
yeah,
No, no one gives a shit.
yeah, it,
Love
so
it.
how do we ask better questions that really dig to the root of who people are and what they care about?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where my mind immediately goes, and it's not directly related, but like, dude, this is what life is about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
life is just way more fun if you're not a dick. I just firmly believe that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
where my mind goes to, and this is why I think it's related to what you're saying, like those relationships, actually giving a shit about people, like that's what fuels it. Like we're all in the people business, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And life is just way more fun. I'm convinced of it. You hold the door open for the extra 5 seconds because the woman is walking with her kid, walking into the gym, holding the child to put the child in daycare and get a workout in. And she's super grateful, and you just smile. Like, it feels good.
Mhm.
These connections, these relationships, regardless of how well you know the person or not, or it's just a fleeting moment throughout the day, those interactions are so powerful, and I think they're just undervalued by too many people. So I love that this is such a focal point for you. um I want to give you a platform to plug all your shit. Where can people find you? Where do you hang out on social? And specifically, I'd love for you to just spend a minute or two making it super clear for people, like who you serve and the exact problems that you're solving for them. Because if people have enjoyed this as much as I have, they're probably really curious and would love to connect with you. So plug away, my friend.
Yeah, so a couple different things. There's kind of two areas to the people that I serve. So one is individuals, primarily engineers and technology professionals who are trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up? How do I move through some of the career transitions? And I use the keyword intentional career transitions. How do I move through that and become the person I need to become? And so we work on some foundational stuff like mindsets, personal branding, then some of the pragmatic stuff like, hey, what do I do with a resume? How do I have a great interview? Where people are trying to move through career transitions and stuff like that. And I love doing that work. But this deeper level of connection work that I'm trying to do, trying to say, hey, there's this epidemic that we were talking about with the Surgeon General's advisory. This is an all hands on deck thing, but primarily I'm focused on how do we do this in the workplace, right? So small businesses and organizations, how do we be part of the solution to improve the connection? And also, by the way, it's a huge impact to your bottom line because you're going to increase creativity, innovation, productivity,
Yeah.
and wellness and retention and all the things that you want when you can actually help people connect beyond just the transactional crap that we're going through and the tasks that need to be done in our workplace, right? Because people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so I do that work in a coaching and training facilitation role for a lot of people there. So where do I hang out? Primarily LinkedIn on social. So you can find me, Jeff Perry, on LinkedIn. And then, Mike, I put something together just recently. I'm calling the connection code. It's an opportunity for people to figure out, hey, where am I at in my organization or my team with this level of connection at the self level, the actions that I'm taking. So there's a mindset, also a culture, also are my structures and process set up to do this well. And so it's a 20 question assessment that you can take and get some insights there. I'll put together something more specifically for this group for the results engine. So people can go check that out at jeff-perry.com/results engine. And I'll put that together just for the listeners here, and they can go check that out.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that, guys. All that will be linked in the show notes. Get connected, show some love, grab the connection guide, hit the website, all that fun stuff. Jeff, last question I have for you, going all the way back, you know,
Mm-hmm.
starting in the engineering career and growing and then experiencing this rebrand, right? And going through the mindset work and having that mirror held up for us and realizing, okay, apparently Jeff doesn't listen, and getting the team enrolled and giving the feedback and holding you accountable and building this community and then getting to the point in that organization where it's like, okay, like I'm kind of throttled. This isn't the right move. In 2019, you take the leap and you bet on yourself and you start to grow the company all the way to where you're at right now, doing all this incredible work with in the connection space, all the great work you're doing with your engineering and technology professionals, this entire window. What's been the biggest lesson that you've learned that has yielded the most results and the biggest impact on your life and in your business?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what actually matters. Like, obviously, Mike, results are great. This is the results engine podcast, right? Like, we're talking about how do we get results, but what is life really about? Like, happiness, satisfaction, joy come from connection, right? To people we love, to causes we care about, to good we can do in the world, to God or a higher power or something that gives us a sense of meaning outside of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So what really matters, and by the way, when we do that, that connection often then propels us to get the results that we were actually looking for. But
Yep.
it's not shooting for the results themselves, but what they mean for us and those that we're impacting. I'll share just a kind of remaining question to kind of ponder for that I ponder a lot, and maybe the listeners will ponder. And it comes from a book. The question is, how will you measure your life? Um, there's a book by that title by Clayton Christensen, who passed away a few years ago. Also, he's known for the theory of disruption, the innovator's dilemma. He was a Harvard business professor, but he wrote a great book towards the end of his life called How Will You Measure Your Life? And so it's a question that I think every single one of us should answer. What are the things that are really important? How am I going to measure what success really means to me? Because it's not just the dollars in the bank account. It's a lot of other things that actually matter.
Boom. There it is. Jeff, thanks for joining me, brother. Really enjoyed this.
Mike, thanks so much for having me, and hope this has been helpful for someone at least.
A
Take care.
100%.